minimum wage lowers the cost of racial discrimination. Let me just give you an example. There's a very nice book written in 1989 called South Africa's War Against Capitalism, and its author is Walter Williams. I did a study of labor markets in South Africa, and it turns out that in South Africa during the apartheid era in the 70s, 80s, the major supporters for minimum wages for blacks were white racist labor unions that would never have a black as a member. Now, why do you think they were arguing for minimum wages for blacks? Well, it's very easy. Let's say a white laborer on a construction project is getting $5 an hour, and a poor, discriminated black doing the same work would be willing to work for $1 an hour. What do you think employers are going to do? When one guy will work for $5 an hour, and here's another guy who says, I'm going to work for $1 an hour. Well, the employer has the incentive to hire the $1 an hour guy. So how can you discourage the employer from hiring the $1 an hour guy? Well, you just eliminate the $1 an hour. You say you get a law passed that the employer must pay $5 an hour no matter whom he hires. Matter of fact, in all of my research, I show that the minimum wage is one of the most effective tools in the arsenal of racists everywhere in the world. Now, you'll say to me, well, look, Walter, labor unions in the United States, they don't feel that way. Well, it doesn't make any difference whether labor unions feel that way. That is, the intentions are irrelevant to the effects. That is, somebody could push me off the Empire State Building, or I could trip. It doesn't make any difference why I went off the top of the building. It has no effect on the law of gravity. Intentions have no effect on economic outcomes.
So I agree with some of what he said because my own research has shown that the minimum wage in America resulted in bad effects for black people in America.
You know what? I kind of figured you was gonna say that.
Yeah. So now I disagree with him on the intentionality of it, but he's talking about South Africa, and that's a different system than the system that we dealt with here in America, and it came under different circumstances. The circumstances of the minimum wage program in America was based in the Great Recession and other things of that nature, trying to spur the economy back into action. And there was already a job war going on in America between black people and the white people that were that weren't upper class or middle class. That were kind of vying for the same jobs. The black people weren't getting those jobs because white labor unions were saying, if you hire niggas, we ain't gonna work with them. So wage was kind of irrelevant in that scenario. But when the Great Recession rolls around, and now whites are struggling to make ends meet and jobs are scarce, minimum wage means the jobs that they would usually overlook are now viable jobs because they have to pay certain level of income. And so the result was black people being forced out of the jobs that we typically held, and now jobs that even we ourselves think we're too good for in the community. So but the reason I say I just wanted to point out the differences is because like I really like I've been rereading Chancellor Williams and a lot of other black scholars, and one of the things that I'm noticing that not just Chancellor Williams but a lot of them are harping on is the fact that, we kind of have to, those of us that have the time, the energy, and the ability to interpret data at this point have a responsibility to do so. And so in this case, because everybody's out here making plans and focused on how they think we need to solve the problem, at least that's what they say, the intentions allude to the thinking, the motives, and the behaviors of the people that are doing the thing, their real goals. And so I think it becomes important that we understand the intentions of what happened, not just saying, yeah, but this is the effect. And this is only for people that want to get involved in creating solutions and things of that nature. If you just want to be involved in implementation, or if you don't care, you just want to do your thing, then none of this stuff matters, because at the end of the day, I agree with what he said, the results are the same. But if you're making a plan of action, then you can't just focus on the results. That's a part of it, but you also have to focus on the intentions, because that speaks to the mindset of the people that created the activity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you're talking about like the last part, you're talking about the mindset of the people. Overall, we're talking about labor and economics and Black people's ability to work. I know this is something that you definitely covered in your book, The Chasm. Definitely chapters dedicated to how, like you said, Black people were forced out of work. So I never thought about minimum wage like that before. That's why this clip was interesting to me. And that's one of the reasons why I chose it. Is I never really thought about minimum wage being a tool for racism. And so listening to what he's saying, and then kind of sitting back and thinking about and analyzing what I've witnessed through my time working. And I think it's a combination of a lot of things that we talk about in the past. Having time to think about this clip and look into some things, not too much time to look into some things, but even just time to analyze a bit, and also analyzing the experiences that I've had with people and working minimum wage myself. It's a real interesting way to look at it, because you have minimum wage being used as a tool for racism, but you also have, people's behavior, just like this past year or 2020, you had the Great Recession. You had a whole bunch of people quitting their jobs and, thinking that they finna go manifest some things without actual real work. And that's what I'm getting at, actual real work. So I think nowadays that's a piece that's missing into what he's saying. But that's more relevant for nowadays, is people's lack of want to go out and work and go out and get it. People being a lot more lazy. So we in itself, I think that's a manifestation of racism in itself, is, that Negro mindset, going back to that. These people have been their mental capacity or their will or whatever, their will to fight, their will to thrive has been beat down so much that they just cool with surviving. And you don't have to put in effort to survive. Well, you have to put in a little effort, but you don't have to put in maximum effort to survive. And so it's like an evolution of it. It's like adding on to it. So you have minimum wage on one end, and then you have people who actually succumb to the Negro mindset. So it's a double-edged sword that's actually stabbing both sides. So
I think it's hard. I'm sorry, PC. Did you just want to say something?
Well, no, y'all go ahead and finish. I'll jump in at the end.
I think so the minimum wage discussion, I think at the time it did have an impact on pushing Black folk in particular out of the job force. Even though I think the intent was to open things up for white people. I don't think Black people were even a consideration at the time that the government was doing their things. And if they were a consideration, it was a consideration in terms of, well, it'll keep these niggas from moving up. All right, that's positive. Right. And that's more reason to do it. Right. But I think one of the things I think that becomes interesting, even with what he's saying, in terms of the white guy being willing to hire the Black guy if the labor was cheaper. We know that racism doesn't exactly work like that.
That's not totally true. Right.
Yeah, that's at least that's not our experience of racism here in America. I don't
especially Africa, here in the South. Nepotism is real.
Different. Right. People are willing to pay more money for lower quality work to deal with the people that they want to deal with.
I've experienced that. I've seen that through my experiences. I say that in addition to seeing people who don't want to work.
Right. So I think that now if the minimum wage argument has become very interesting because it's now become a way that people are talking about how do we shrink the growing income disparity, which is interesting because if the goal was really to shrink the income disparity, then you don't solve that problem by trying to raise the floor when the ceiling is racing away. You solve that problem, unfortunately, by lowering the ceiling. So if we were genuinely talking about lowering the income disparity, we would be talking about a maximum wage limit, not a minimum wage bottom.
Yeah.
Like that'd be like that's the way you solve that problem. CEOs
but that'll never happen.
Right.
Ooh,
so that's what's up.
What he said.
You sound like a
What
commie. You sound like a goddamn commie.
I was like, oh shit, I fucked up. Uh-oh. My fault.
Hey, nah, it's all good. You get at least 2 or 3 fucks.
No, but I and even to that, that's a great point, PC. I am a capitalist. I don't have no problems with saying that. And then I've been debated on that before. I'm a capitalist. That's what it is. But if we are seriously talking about solving this income inequality thing, then that's not something you solve at the floor. That's something you solve at the ceiling. But that's a conversation that people I've been talking to people for years. When I bring that concept up, most of the time people say they never even thought about it. How in the hell are you talking about income inequality and you've never even thought about putting a cap on the ceiling? How is that? But we know what that is too, right? That's human behavior. Everybody thinks they're gonna make $1 billion and they don't want to ever
right. How can I also become a millionaire like everybody else if you're gonna put a cap on my wages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So here we are with a non-starter
manifestation.
Because Marcus Garvey had a plan. I believe it was, the most you can make is $5 million. Then everything from that goes to the next, help to build the next millionaire and so forth and so on. But, and Pat, you covered it beautifully. There's not really much more to add to the historical context that you just put out there in regards to how this particular concept of racism, of minimum wage being utilized for racism. Because, like you said, I think the minimum wage, it didn't take into consideration. No, I don't think any laws in this country, unless it specifically says so, really gave a damn about its effects on Black people, not in a positive way anyway.
Right.
So I think when especially around this time, you still had, you're talking about recovering from, you're talking about the New Deal, right? You're talking about recovering from the worst stock market crash to date, the worst recession to date. And then you had to keep taking into consideration all of these immigrants coming from other countries that were brought here to compete with the skilled labor class that Black people were thriving in at that particular time. And like you said, that's why those unions came about. This was about the fact that only time they hired Black people is when they needed them.
Right.
This is a labor class out of necessity.
Right.
So
always been that.
I mean, even if you look to today, right? Because you covered the past, man. I'm talking about today. And you look at what this livable wage, because now the conversation is about livable wages, right? So now all of a sudden, people are trying to push the livable wages up, but minimum wage, I don't think was ever designed to compete with inflation.
I would agree with that.
And Black people are always going to get, as long as Black people depend on this system, we're always going to get the short end of the stick.